So hi guys again, whatever time, wherever you are in the world. It's Too Many Cuts with me, Charles Burns, once again. And today I'm joined by Chris Pinckley. Where are you based, Chris? Whereabouts in the US?
I am in Dublin, California, which is part of the San Francisco Bay Area. It's known as I believe it's known as part of the Tri-Valley. I'm kind of new to this area. I've been in the Bay Area about 15 years. I lived in Berkeley for a while. I lived in Lafayette for a while, but it's all sort of east of the main city of San Francisco. We're out a ways.
Perfect. So yeah, without further ado, let's kind of get into the conversation. I've had a look at your LinkedIn profile and your website, obviously, and fascinating history and what you're doing now, and I guess what you're going to be going forward as well. It's going to be really interesting. I guess a good place to start is the first thing I've seen anyway, which seems like years ago. I mean, I was born in 93, so 1998 seems like super retro. So in 1998, you started a company, I believe, called Holistic Fitness for You. Is that the case?
Yes, correct. Holistic Fitness for You was my first. It wasn't my first personal training business, but it was the first time that I really got serious with it. Before that, I had been personal training on my own. That's kind of my foundation, is physical fitness, physical performance, and rehabilitation. And it was my first serious go at creating a business sort of legitimately. And it had its ups and downs, but ultimately I was able to establish myself in the San Francisco Bay Area as basically the top 3 personal training companies for at least 2 years. I was in the top 3 as far as just the amount of business and people that I was training. And it was kind of prolific. It was overwhelming. In fact, I had people on a waiting list. Yeah. And so I'm very blessed to say, and the foundation was, I've always been a believer in alternative health and fitness too. And so my foundation was holistic healing has always been kind of the backdrop. And that's one of the reasons also why I'm excited to talk today to tell people, some of the things that we'll talk about, coming up. But it was my first go at running a small business.
What do you put down to the fact that you were, the top 3 and super successful in the area? I don't know what it was like in the States at that time, but certainly now the world is, certainly the UK is awash with personal trainers. Some are not great, some are very good, few and far between, depends. In 1998, where you were based, was there just not a lot of people that were doing it? Were you just very good at it? Were you very personable? Like, what do you think was the reason that you were super successful at that point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the thing was that there were, even back then, there were an epic number of personal trainers, and more every year. It was growing exponentially because it's pretty awesome to be able to, if you love fitness, it's pretty awesome to be able to do what you love. Being in the gym and training people is kind of a dream come true for a lot of people, especially it was for me for many years. And the thing that differentiated me, well, first of all, there was a couple of things that differentiated me, that I was just doing the very basics when it came to my personal training. Is the first thing, and all I had was just a couple of lines on Craigslist to advertise. That's it.
Wow.
I mean, the first couple of things that you can do to differentiate yourself are kind of startling. One is show up on time every time, right? And you'd be surprised the number of personal trainers who don't do that. You'd be surprised. Number 2 is don't put an ad of yourself without any clothes on. Ridiculous. The number of people that do that. It's one thing to do that in clothing to show your physique. It's another thing that back then there were dudes without shirts and there were women wearing bra. I mean, it was ridiculous. And then number 3 was don't cross any personal boundaries with your clients. I mean, these may seem very basic and fundamental to people like you and I, and even perhaps the listeners may be thinking, well, of course I wouldn't do any of those things, but you would be surprised at the number of people that fail to meet those basic 3 criteria. And perhaps part of that was personal training wasn't as understood as a real profession back then as it is now. And so you had everybody's uncle and cousin trying to train somebody in their basement, and plenty of people thinking that it's okay to sleep with your clients, and ridiculous things that you just don't even apply anymore. That said, there was another thing that I was doing that made my business epic. And this is the differentiating factor. And I haven't always been able to replicate this, right? I like to be transparent about everything, but I had basically sort of, it doesn't do it justice to say this, but here's a very simple way of doing it. I had mastered law of attraction. You could kind of say that doesn't do it justice because it was more of a lot of tools that don't necessarily fall directly into, what a lot of people think is sort of pop culture bullshit, right? But to simplify it and nutshell it, which again isn't doing it justice, I had mastered law of attraction. The expanded story is kind of amazing because I met this guy that was kind of profound and yet not profound, but he was, I met this guy, I was already on the spiritual path, and I met this guy that was doing something crazy with just his mind. He wasn't doing any advertising at all. And I ran into him in a really low day, and he was doing something really, really crazy with his mind to bring people out of nowhere. And back then, he had a studio out in like Panola or Hercules, I forget, which is kind of in the Bay Area. That's considered, especially back then, it's sort of considered the middle of nowhere. Right. And he would get this crowd of people to come in and take his like Taibo, classes. And he also had a gym and he had personal trainers working for him. And he told me, and this is also a nutshell of this story too, but I want to get to some of the things, the takeaways for our listeners. So he told me this guy looked like Chuck Norris, like right out of a Chuck Norris. He had like the karate gi on and then a tank top with the sleeves cut off, like, and a mullet. The white dude but he was profound. If I would have looked at him and just judged him, I would have never listened to him in my life, but he was saying profound stuff. And I was in a low place. I was ready to hear the message. Sure. And he told me, I turn it on in my mind when I want them to come, and I turn it off when I don't. And I left that meeting with this guy knowing that I wanted to be able to do what he did. And a year later, I had achieved it. And I could just turn it on in my mind. And I could literally, it's going to sound crazy to some people, especially when I don't have a bunch of data to back it up.
Yeah.
You can read about it in my books. I've written 23 books. Some of them are unpublished. I've published, I'm coming out with a new trilogy this year, but I could literally say, okay, this week I want 3 new clients, and they would show up. I could say, but I also, here was the catch to it. I had to feel it. If I didn't really want it and I said that, nothing would happen. So I had to really want it. And that was another lesson for me too. Eventually I got to a place where I wanted to write and I wanted to speak and I wanted to coach. I wanted to move out of personal training. It was no longer as rewarding for me. And what was interesting is that I still needed to make the money, but I'd already my heart wasn't in it anymore. So I would say I want 3 new clients. They would not show up.
Yep.
So I got to learn the hard end of that lesson, where, everything kind of just deteriorated from underneath me because, my heart wasn't in it. Right. So there were a lot of, along with the gifts came a lot of hard ass lessons that I had to learn as I went broke trying to do something that I was no longer aligned with. Right.
Yeah. My personal relationship with that kind of thing is a little bit different, but I believe that, I suppose it's three P's, I kind of call it. So persistence, and then the bigger 2, I think, is passion and purpose. If you can fuse passion and purpose together in what you do, you're going to be successful, right? Because so many people are just doing things just for a paycheck, and I totally respect that, and it's very important. But then they're not doing anything that they're passionate about or that there's much purpose to, apart from making a dime to put bread on the table, which is respectable and it's very important. But beyond that, there's no fulfillment. And I think that kind of comes into a bit of what you're saying there. I just want to circle back a bit. I might have got this wrong in chronology purposes, but you talk about being homeless as well. Does that happen before the personal training, after? Where in your story does that happen?
There was a period when I was coming out to LA, and I basically left Lincoln, Nebraska. One of my biggest battles in this incarnation, in this lifetime, has been battling poverty consciousness and worthiness issues. And so, I always had like the inspiration, the motivation, and the kind of the chi force to do and make things happen. But my worthiness issues and my poverty consciousness would kind of keep me kind of going back down, right?
Is
And
that
so
kind of imposter syndrome? Is that like they kind of refer to it today as a bit imposter
what is it?
syndrome, or no? Imposter syndrome, where you kind of don't believe you're worthy of the position you're being given or the salary that you're earning. Is it that kind of thing, or no?
It sounds exactly like that. I
Okay.
haven't ever, I'm not familiar with that, but it sounds exactly like that, where you basically, you find subconsciously, you find ways to continue to sabotage yourself because you
Yeah.
do not feel that you're worthy of having it. So it sounds very similar, if not the exact same thing. And so I left, but I knew I needed to get out of Lincoln, Nebraska. I mean,
Mhm.
at first I needed to get out of Fayetteville, Arkansas, and then I needed to get out of Lincoln, Nebraska, right? I've lived all over the place. But when I left Lincoln to go to Los Angeles, it was to become a martial arts actor, right?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I left in an old 87 Nissan Sentra with a cracked windshield, no registration, right? No insurance, and $200 in my pocket. And all I knew is that I had a place to stay on a couch for 2 weeks with a
Okay.
guy who was a friend of a friend.
Sure.
And I'm very, very grateful to that guy to this day. And I got out there and I hit the ground running, and there were some ups and downs. And so as a result of kind of the next 5 years I also had some weird health issues kind of happen 2 years after I got there. And that's kind of what led to becoming homeless and sort of, living out of my car. I was never really a bona fide, like there are some people that are destitute. And I like to make sure that I humble myself and say that I'm blessed that I was never destitute,
Okay.
right? Although very close people in my family have been. I mean,
Okay.
some crazy stuff. Our family's just been, through the
Through
ringer.
the mill. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I never want to, because I think there's a certain amount of audacity in saying that, there are some gurus that say that they were homeless or they had this or that, but they never truly lived on the streets.
Got you.
And had to wonder where, I've had moments where I didn't know where my next meal was coming from, but that was more my childhood growing up very poor and just in very, sometimes kind of bleak, bleak situations.
Yes. Yes.
So I've seen a lot of it, but, I wasn't born in Afghanistan, where I had one of my arms cut off, or,
Absolutely.
I'm not, I wasn't born a crack baby, so I'm always know that there are people out there that have had some heinous situations. I always want to be respectful of that.
So just to go back, so you went to LA, you tried the martial arts acting thing, it actually didn't work out, and then you kind of stumbled into this fitness business, which worked out. And the homelessness bit, the kind of imposter syndrome bit, did that come after being successful or before this holistic fitness?
Yeah. Sorry. So the timeline is that basically, that the lowest points happened pretty much right before I started to get serious about personal training. Once I really focused on that, things started to happen for me. But there were still ups and downs. And I still had, because my path is primarily spiritual, it's my belief that that's some of the things that have been some of the obstacles have been put there are for my growth and development.
Yeah.
And for those people who are primarily spiritually oriented, I've seen a lot of them, get dealt some pretty freakishly, heinously challenging scenarios to rise above and beyond. So, for all I know, it was happening for that reason. Right.
Sure. And one of the things you talk about as well is life-threatening illness. At what point is that in your timeline? Where did that kind of come about?
That's actually recent. I'm only just now. It's pretty exciting to come out of 2 years of, some just, there's no real words to describe it. I lost 50 pounds and basically, I would say I probably came pretty close to biting it 4 times. I had notes written out on my computer ready to send, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So the only thing more exciting than that is to finally come out of it and get ready to launch yourself and then get hit with the coronavirus pandemic.
Is that literally how recent we're talking?
That's literally how recent. I'm only this past 2 months getting back on my feet. I've only like 2 months ago gained back all the 50 pounds I lost, right? and and built a new website, getting ready to launch, and
Wow. Wow. I think
Oh,
we'll probably come back to that. I think it's probably
yeah.
some of the lessons you learn. In fact, I may as well go into it now whilst we're talking about it. Like coming to terms with the fact that, writing notes, you say, from your computer and that kind of stuff, like on reflection, like what do you see life very differently now? You say you're a very spiritual person
Oh,
anyway, but how's your view changed on what life is
oh
about
man.
for you?
I mean, they're mostly just profound lessons in humility. I mean, I've always been a pretty confident person. And, I've definitely had, for some reason, I've had to learn every single lesson the hardest way possible. Right. Um, and, I'm completely self-taught, completely self-reliant. I never had a mentor or a guide or anything like that. And just always just reading, watching, studying, applying, reading, watching, studying, applying over and over and over again. The lessons that came out of this were, profound. Be grateful for every day of health that you have. um, don't take anyone for granted ever. Don't take any person in your life for granted. um, you know um, be absolutely, I've always had a reverence and respect for people who are suffering. That's just, I was kind of given that humility early on in life. But I know there are times when I arrogantly or through some sort of audacity assumed that I knew what somebody else was going through. Just because my life's been hard, I assumed that I knew. And I know that I don't know now, because I was given such a profound lesson. I mean, sometimes I would go weeks with only 2-3 hours of sleep a night because I had to cough to not internally drown. I had to keep it from going into my lungs. It was this weird thing going on. I don't want to get into the details.
Mm-hmm.
But there, each phase of that journey was just another deeper level of hell. And it gave me some profound humiliation, and respect and reverence, most importantly, reverence for people who do suffer, And so, if we segue into the coronavirus and what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have no fear, zero fear of that shit. I mean, just and I know there are people, but at the same time, I know there are people who are suffering and people who have passed away, and there are people who have lost loved ones. So I have a lot of respect and reverence for them. But I am in no way given into fear of this thing. And we can talk about, ways to naturally inoculate yourself so that people can know that there are things you can do to stop the virus from being able to replicate in your system. Right. So, a lot of this has come out of that.
Okay, let's go a little bit on to kind of more of your journey. So, so you've gone to this business. It was 10 years or so that you were within the personal training kind of sphere. Why? I guess it was 2008. Was it to do with the financial crash or anything as to why you moved out of there, or was it just you felt that you'd gotten to the end of the
There were a
road for
couple of
you?
things. I would be lying to say that didn't impact my business. There was, within 3 months of that, I had lost 70% of my clientele.
Wow.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that was, but at the same time, I also felt like I was more aligned to something bigger. And I was just ready to publish my first book, Reality Creation 101, at that time. So there was this big transitioning period of basically me falling out of alignment kind of with personal training, wanting to align to something, wanting to expand myself. And then also like this huge crash that caused me to, and I had just bought myself and this is also, there was a lesson of ego versus grace, sort of like there's a story about my first brand new car, which was a brand new BMW, and how there was like a bit of like grace of getting that, even though, I had like my credit rating was just garbage. And there's a story getting that. And then the next one was a better, nicer one. And that was all ego. And I lost that, with that. I had to actually just do a voluntary repo on that, during that time period, because, but I the lesson to me was very clear. And that's, be graceful and stay within the flow of life. When you start to let your ego want to take control is when you fall out of alignment. This is at least my lesson, I don't know if anybody else's lesson is this, but for me personally, there was a state of grace, a flow where I could feel, as long as I stayed aligned and I did my work and my exercises, as long as I stayed in alignment, that I was kind of just being carried through into abundance, and showing up and representing, myself at the highest. Whereas when I, allowed my ego to take over and I began to preach that I'm so great and I'm, it's because of me, I'm creating this, and not, giving the proper credit to, grace and, spiritual alignment, then it basically all just, ripped from my arms. And that's kind of the way I see it. Although there's definitely a physical reality of having the anything financially related crash, something that's considered a luxury item like coaching, even though coaching is now understood to be more of a necessity. It's just proven time and time again that the world's highest level performers all have coaches, right? But back then it was especially considered, so personal training and coaching and that type of thing were considered luxury items. So boom, there's a physical reality there. But at the same time, I saw a greater lesson for myself. And that is like, when you allow the ego to take over and you basically associate your achievement with your greatness, my personal experience and the experience of people in my circle has been that you're getting ready to take a fall.
Yeah. No, yeah. I've had similar experiences also with things that I've done. So out of that kind of physical training, you mentioned this kind of a fellow that you met that was very spiritual and spiritually aligned and helps you kind of via the law of attraction or whatever you want to call it, become more successful. At what point in time did you go, right, I want to, pivot or move into coaching, holistic coaching, rather than just personal training? Or were you doing it side by side anyway, and then you just went, hold on a minute, I want to go full throttle into this?
Yeah, it was kind of side by side with the idea that I would move into full-time coaching. Okay. And that's where what I didn't get that I feel that I understand now, it's taken me only, 15 years to really fully understand it, is that, and forgive me for saying it this way, it's going to kind of sound a little esoteric. But I feel that Spirit wanted me to learn how to not hustle, but to really go for it, move beyond fear. I had to also confront, and I believe this is where, worthiness issues come in. I had to confront the fear of speaking, which ultimately for me was a feeling of, who am I to say this to these other people? And there are a lot of people out there that understand that it's the fear doesn't really come from stage fright. It comes from a lack of feeling of worthiness. It's interesting. If you address the worthiness issues, a lot of the fear of speaking goes away, because it's okay. You feel, you don't have that feeling of, wait, what am I doing up here? That then leads to feelings of like, I'm going to get humiliated, or I'm something bad. There's going to be some sort of repercussion, right? That all kind of goes away, interestingly, when you can address your worthiness issues. And so that was kind of, I hit that ceiling, and I had to work on that because really to be successful in the way that I wanted to, I was being called to speak. And so Spirit was not, there was, again, you forgive me for the kind of esoteric, but I'm going to just tell it the way that I feel like I understand.
That's the best way.
Yeah. So I feel like I was being called to expand myself, to go into speaking, to do these things. And I kept hitting this ceiling, this worthiness ceiling. And the way it manifested in the beginning was I was all of a sudden I was given all these speaking opportunities. They just came to me. And I managed to, excuse my language, I managed to fuck up every single one of them, and it was because just, this massive feeling of unworthiness, right? And so there were, it was this again. And then I had to actually go back, and because it wasn't working, I had to go back and rebuild, part of my personal training business and hold on to that for another however many years while I continued. So then, just to finish out the chronology a little bit, basically after that, I started to it took a while, but I started to finally book speaking engagements, and, I started to get good at it, and I started to get, coaching clients, executives, coaches, founders of businesses, small business owners who could, were kind of like on the rise, stuff like that. And that was when I started to get chronic fatigue and other symptoms. And there was a 5-year period where I started to get a little sicker. I started having brain fog, headache, lack of energy, and then basically led up to a certain point where all of a sudden it went 100x. And then I had to I lost everything else and had to fight for my life for 2 years. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing me kind of like reemerge after almost a decade of health issues, but more succinctly, a 5-year period and a 2-year period. So you could say really like 7 years of kind of like crazy health issues, and now reemerging, from my own personal wasteland, and then into the zombie apocalypse, right? Right?
I was talking to a friend actually as to what sorts of people were late to figure out coronavirus and what it all meant, and how that might work psychologically, and I guess you're a good example of that, someone that's just come through some medical difficulties and now is back healthy again, thankfully, and then this. So yeah, you're probably a good example of someone that's kind of it's hit hard in some respects, but I guess again we can compare ourselves all we want to other people.
Yeah.
So actually, you mentioned about the worthiness, and as I say, I think the way, particularly the English kind of British term, is certainly imposter syndrome, or that sense of worthiness of, particularly if you're speaking and what you're trying to do is influence other people in a positive way. How did you address that? What physical steps can people take right now? Say you've just become a manager in a company, or just been promoted, or you've just moved jobs, and you're like, hold on a minute, I've got a huge salary now. And my brother had a similar thing where like his salary level's gone up, his responsibility level's gone up. And I think he had that bit of anxiety. And then I think you might have come across it with the emotional cycle of change. Have you come across that model before?
You mean somebody who is by model? Do you mean an example of somebody who has kind of been promoted or now has more money and more responsibility, who is experiencing anxiety?
So there is that, but there's also a physical model that I learned back in my professional career at Tesco, which like a Walmart equivalent for those that don't know, supermarket. And they taught us this thing as managers called the emotional cycle of change. And you'll know it by a different term. It's the ups and downs, of which can be daily, hourly, they can be monthly, yearly, of your emotions, of that uninformed optimism when you get an opportunity.
What is it called then? What's it called?
The emotional cycle of change.
Okay.
It's a really nice, neat, kind of concise way of showing the curve that goes when you're really kind of, say, take a new job is a good example. So you start the new job, and before you take the job on, the interview for it, you get the job and you're super pumped, you're really excited, and that's what you call uninformed optimism. You don't really know what you're getting into if you get moving company and moving role, etc. And you get promoted.
Yeah.
Then you go into that company.
Careful what you ask for, type of thing.
Yeah. Then you get into that company, and you day one and to whatever it is, maybe a few weeks, could be dependent on who you are, what you're doing. You're like, oh my word, this is way too hard for me. I shouldn't be here. And that's kind of the point where you got to, I suppose, that self, how and what steps did you take, or what can people take away to help them get over that, I suppose?
Right. I have a lot of tools and tactics for that type of thing. One of the things that I do is I do emotional. I have some of my clients do this too. Emotional freedom technique, EFT. I do specifically on worthiness, and I use a guy, Brad Yates, for that. Another thing is daily exercise. I have my clients do a morning metabolic burner, which is, it might sound like it's not really related, but when you bring your body in alignment with your mind, there's an instant 10x in your confidence, right? You can physically burn through anxiety by doing some push-ups, crunches, and squats in the morning. Also meditation. I teach my clients meditation. I teach them a basic mantra, utilize the Soham mantra. Anytime you can transcend the linear mind and connect to the non-linear, you can and will, transcend anxiety. It calms you. It also enables you to tap into the non-linear, which is where, most of the world's highest level performers operate from, kind of a sense of stillness. And then, even affirmations, phrases, one of the things I like to say myself is I am clear, precise, and exact in every moment. Every function of my mind and body is controlled and governed by divine wisdom and divine order. And it's one of my personal affirmations. I've sort of extrapolated that from Dr. Joseph Murphy and kind of twisted, rigged it up and made it into my own. It's you'll find something similar in there, but I kind of take them and I tweak them a little bit. And then also it's sort of on a performance level. I think of everything holistically. Superior mindset, superior biochemistry, and superior physicality. The mindset of, and then one of the primary tools mindset wise is the ability to redirect yourself. It's one thing, sometimes there is a suppressed emotional charge that has to do with anxiety or fear that needs to be integrated, and you need to go into it to allow it to surface for integration so you can reclaim that part of your psyche. Integral psychologists or transpersonal psychologists might call it shadow work. For me, it's very simply suppressed emotional charge that is generating a smaller neural network. Once you integrate that, your neural network immediately expands as a result of that. It's like taking the powerhouse, the charge pack out of, this small loop and plugging it into a bigger one. I think I lost my train of thought there, but
no, you were just talking about kind of how you teach and coach people to overcome this kind of worthlessness, imposter syndrome.
Yeah. There are a lot of things. It all sort of, the redirect is powerful. That's a muscle that needs to be worked though. And when I say redirect, what I mean is, have your kind of mission statement, why you're doing what you're doing, as an anchor. And if you can catch yourself, it's kind of profound. You will actually, inside of 24 hours, you can do this. And I guarantee that for anybody that successfully does this, they'll begin to witness a change. And that is the ability to begin to, when you slip into negative limited thinking, which can be anything. And for some of us, there are more triggers than others, right? Especially the more challenges you face, the more potential triggers you have. It's not an excuse, it's just a reality. And I really respect people that are surrounded by, challenging situations. I don't take anybody for granted. But anybody can do this in any situation. And that is the constant, unending ability to, every time you catch yourself, which you might catch yourself in the instant, or it could be 5 minutes, or it could be a half hour, or you could find it, kind of snap out of it 2 hours later. Instantly redirect yourself into your mission statement, your vision, what it is that you're trying to create, who you're trying to help, why you're doing what you're doing. And sometimes I'll do it 100 times an hour, just because the last, for me, especially the last 2 years were the most challenging of my entire life. So it's a muscle though. You have to be able to redirect yourself. So I teach that. I teach, I have a bunch of tools. But it's sort of, it might sound kind of trite to say this, but I kind of do, in a sense, the same thing that Wendy Rhodes does on Billions on the show. Have you ever seen that show?
Yeah, I know. I love that show. It's brilliant.
That's
Do you want to just tell people what she does and what that is, just with others who don't know?
It's brilliant, and it's really just pulling out whatever's blocking people. And sometimes all you have to do is pull out the blockages. You don't have to superimpose anything on there. And then sometimes you need to input some positive programming in there. But in essence, it's just, it's making people better at every single thing they do. For me, it's the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, right? So high level performers don't have any, you can't operate at the highest levels and have an unaddressed area in your life.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
So that brings nicely on to, I guess, you have discussed in there as well, but I think what you call, correct me if I'm wrong, consciousness coaching. Is that your kind of main trait, whether it be you're addressing corporate clients, keynotes, whether it be one-on-one with higher performers? Is it all about this kind of, again, you mentioned something called blind spots and state of mind training and mind removal programs? Are all these techniques things that you use to help, you use the word quite well, I think, to remove blockages from high level performers? Is those the sort of things and tools that you would use, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter whether they are a corporate client, executive that wants to just move up the ladder. I go about it the same way. Of course, every strategy that I design with the client is unique and it's tailored to their needs. I meet them wherever they're at, right? And whatever their goals are, it's tailored and tweaked to meet their goals. But whether it's an executive trying to get promoted, or whether it's a small business owner trying to get more clients, or whether it's, somebody who might potentially be a celebrity or something who wants to, have to be careful here, who wants to, just perform better by way of being more emotionally balanced, which really translates to just a better personal life for somebody at that level of the game. But it affects their performance, their ability to continue to perform, their ability to be consistent, to consistently show up to gigs, on location and perform at the highest levels. You can't underestimate the integrating suppressed emotional charges, that's something that has been, plaguing you since childhood.
Absolutely. And do you, I presume within your kind of roster of clients, you've worked with sports, athletes, that kind of stuff as well? Do you find not as much?
You'd be surprised. I would think that I would get more. It's interesting though. I've only just recently started really fully understanding that what I do is performance coaching. So I expect that it may change. There has been a little bit of talk with a couple studios, MMA studios that are local here. As you know, Northern California is pretty big on mixed martial arts. So there's been a little bit of talk with a couple studios around here that are, pretty big. But, we'll see what happens. The thing is that I only just recently in the last couple of years, throughout this process, have understood that what I do is performance coaching. It just really clicked. And it adds more enthusiasm and excitement when you really understand who you are and what you're offering. And for some people like me, it can take just about a half a lifetime to get there. But then when you get there, a 1,000 tidal waves.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about as well operating from a place of inner stillness. What does that really mean for you? And I guess it's taking a new meaning now, particularly the period of time we're in with the isolation due to coronavirus, but also because of your own personal coming through your own personal troubles. Has the meaning of that inner stillness changed? And I'm sure you've been challenged more the last 2 years around that kind of theme. What does that mean for you, really?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I was reduced to, there were days where I would be, more calm than others, but I was reduced to many times completely externalizing my power by reaching out to different people in my Facebook community for helps of different forms. I was reduced to hands and knees, groveling, begging God, I just want to be transparent that throughout that process, I was reduced and my power was very externalized. I did not maintain, there was at least a year where my composure was out the window, destroyed. But I also feel like perhaps that was necessary so that I could remake myself. I just, now, despite the fact that I still feel lucky and blessed to have survived that. And I know it was not all me by any stretch of the imagination. There was, I don't know what you say as higher power or spirit, taking me through that. But I made it, I survived. And, my confidence level after, coming back from something like that, from being reduced to less than nothing, now it's, it's kind of taken on the opposite. So for me, there's a 100, I would say, not a 360 because you're facing the same direction, right? But 180 degree difference What was, I'm a little distracted. What was the gist of the question again? I'm missing the other part.
No, you've gone on to kind of the topic I was talking about, operating from a place of inner stillness. Like in your
Yes.
teaching, say a high level CEO of a Fortune 500 company, for argument's sake, comes to you. Like, I imagine, and it's just I imagine, their lives are very hectic, right? So how do you help them create this?
When you're dealing with somebody who's got that much responsibility, and my reference was to the fact that my inner stillness was challenged, right?
Absolutely, no, without question.
And when you're dealing with somebody who's got a lot of responsibility or is in a place where a lot of eyeballs are on you, here's a couple of things. First, to find stillness is a retreat from the stress that brings on. The next thing that happens is your decision making becomes a lot more clear. A lot of the noise is cleared away, and it's sort of like if you're on a chessboard and you look down and you see all these pieces everywhere. From inner stillness, you can look down and you can see checkmate instantly, right? That's what enables you. That's the non-linear perspective, is to see checkmate every time you look at the board. The linear perspective just sees the next move, right? The non-linear perspective doesn't just see 5 moves ahead, it sees to checkmate every single time, right? So if you can tap into that, then you begin to see holistically the entire picture, more of it. And as a result of that, you tap into your own higher level of intelligence, and you come up with more ideas that lend to more productivity and enable you to, enable people to do some pretty amazing things. I would argue that almost all the billion-dollar ideas in the world came from the nonlinear, came from somebody who was able to tap in somehow, some way. They might have been working on something, but they didn't come up with the idea. I think that each and every one of these people would readily agree to you that they received it. And part of the reason that they would readily agree that is because people who tap into nonlinear also have much less ego, generally speaking. The less ego you have, the more you're able to receive from your higher levels of intelligence than somebody who is more ego-driven or more of a linear thinker. Linear thinking has its place in execution and doing things and getting things done. But if you want to have a bigger impact and help and serve humanity in a greater way, then you have to tap into the nonlinear.
And you talk about on your kind of about page on your website as well, that personally, in terms of meditation and something you call emotional integration, that you've recorded over 10,000 plus hours of meditation, which is phenomenal. And also the emotional integration piece plus 5,000 hours. I think most people are familiar with meditation and the benefits, but for those that don't know, me included, what is emotional integration to you, and what do those hours account for?
Yeah. Emotional integration, in my opinion and perspective, is one of the most profound things that you can ever do in your entire life, because what it is in a nutshell, it's surrendering into the deepest, darkest parts of yourself and allowing them to unconditionally surface. Anxiety and nervousness is in essence caused by not suppressing, but repressing your emotion. There's a difference between suppressed and repressed, right? Suppressed emotional charges are there from specific incidents, usually in childhood or early on, that psychologically we were unable to deal with. And so they become suppressed. Automatically, your psyche sequesters it because it knows you can't handle it. You're going to implode. Something bad's going to happen. Repression is when you feel it coming up, but you don't want to deal with it. And so you push it back down. It could be just a bunch of surface level crap that's been gathering up, or it could be something that's trying to surface for integration, but you feel fearful about it surfacing. So you repress it because you don't want to experience it. The great irony is that if you truly unconditionally surrender to it and you allow it to burn through you, the Buddhist monks in the mountains for a couple thousand years call it burning through karma. So when you sit unconditionally, allow it to surface, the interesting thing is like trapped heat, it will burn through you. The more profound thing is not only do you feel instantly better, but when you go to search for that emotional feeling or that trigger, it's gone. You have automatically, your neural network is reformed because there's nothing pulling it back to that smaller loop. It's gone. You reform a neural network. Your brain repatterns itself. You think differently. And it's pretty interesting to search for something that bothered you and come up with nothing. That's kind of interesting, right?
I'm curious to understand. So, say I was a client and came to you, and so for me, I'm a founder of a company, and it's a technology company, and I've got aspirations for what it will be, etc. What does that first initial session practically look like? And then going forwards, how often, frequently do you meet people? I'm sure it's very varied and personalized, but I'm just curious for those that don't or are new to this whole world of coaching, me included. I know what it is, but I haven't actually explored it. I'm just curious to know what it looks like practically for someone like me.
Well, we come to I appreciate you asking that. We come to what I believe is the most important fundamental principle of coaching, which is being a profoundly good listener, being a listener, being the best listener in the world, right? Mm-hmm. There is a concept I refer to as holding space.
Yeah, I was going to come to this.
Yeah, which means that you have yourself done enough work within and on yourself so that you can hear anything and it doesn't provoke a reaction within you. This is, I can't say this without sounding arrogant, but I'm just going to say it anyway. It's 1 in a million to get somebody who has that level of listening that could hear you say something that is potentially really disturbing, and have no reaction to it authentically, not just be kind of holding your face there, but internally going, holy shit, but actually authentically hearing it and not caring at all.
Do you put that down to a lot of the things you've gone through in your past and that shaping?
I put that down to 2 things. My life experience. There's not a lot you can tell me that I haven't seen or witnessed. A, and then B, the emotional integration of myself, the willingness of myself to go to the deepest, darkest places within myself and allow that to surface unconditionally. The session, so the first session is definitely mostly listening and hearing, right? And if you can listen unconditionally, you'll get things that other people will not pick up. In fact, I go as far as to say is if you can listen, you can hold the space at that profound level, people can transform from that alone because most people will have never experienced somebody that listens unconditionally, that listens with no charge to anything that you say or no ulterior motive to it, right? So to be able to do that in and of itself is a profound service. But, so the first is the listening, right? And that could be most of even the first hour of coaching. Mm-hmm. And then is the reflection and feedback. And if you listen unconditionally, things will jump out at you that you would not be able to see if you have an ulterior motive. If you're trying to just overlay some sort of program onto people, then you're not going to authentically allow them to express themselves because you already have an agenda in a sense. There's nothing wrong with having a program in place, provided that, from my perspective, the superior levels of coaching are the ability to really hear the deepest things that somebody has to say. And when somebody feels safe to say those things to you, that's kind of amazing. That's a privilege. That I don't take lightly either. People have said things to me, that, I know they can't tell anybody else. I mean, I'm not saying that they haven't. That would be arrogant to say that. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I create the space for them to tell me anything. And they know they can tell me anything. And there will be zero egoic attachment in any way, which leads to projection, right? Some sort of projection. And a projection is always based on some sort of external or internal should, this should or shouldn't be that way, right? So that's the beginning of it. And then then we come to like tools and tactics. If there's something needs to be integrated, we go through emotional integration, which is sort of like a guided meditation, but much, much more profound because I am using questions to trigger consciousness and creating a space to allow something to happen that has never before probably or likely happened, right? There's also a difference between emotional release and emotional integration. Emotional release, and they get mistaken for each other a lot. Emotional release is nothing like emotional integration. Emotional release is when, somebody, you'll have a good cry or yell or scream or something, or dump something. It's also not emotional dumping either, when you dump something onto somebody else and you weight them down with your stuff. But emotional release is just when you kind of let go of the surface layer of stuff that's kind of just been building up. You feel better, but you haven't done any permanent healing. Nothing has really happened except for just allowing the surface layer of crap to go off. And there's different techniques for that. Emotional integration is profound because you achieve a permanent integration, a permanent healing, and you shift forever, permanently when that happens, because you're releasing something that's been stuck in there for your entire life, likely.
What, on a slightly different note, so I think a lot of people nowadays, maybe the younger generation, are looking on social media and they're looking at people, and there's a whole nother kind of conversation there as to what the influence social media is. But something that's interesting to me, and I have my own view on it, is the likes of your Grant Cardones, your Gary Vaynerchuks, these type of characters that kind of profess to be able to, change people, and they put things on social media that I think are very much for clickbait purposes, and actually, rather, in my opinion, are rather quite empty. What's your view on those sorts of characters, and kind of, are they doing a disservice to what you guys do, or is it just they're a different style of thing? I'm curious what your view is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've gone through phases. I think there's something, I think there's something very powerful about being a motivator and, being a motivator and inspirer. I think there's tremendous value if you can lift people up. Mm-hmm. I do see a lot of people partnering with each other purely for the purposes of promoting themselves with very little value to the followers. And I see people utilizing tactics just to get followers to follow them and promote them, and offer, in essence, offer almost, zero to little value to their followers. I think, like, if we specifically took Grant Cardone, because I just like to be transparent. I like him for his motivation and what he's done. I do see him doing a lot of promotional stuff that I'm not necessarily, really excited about. Some of these folks are, they also, here is the essence, the quintessential essence of this for me, are people who promote services and products that they themselves did not use to get to where they are.
That's a very good point.
That kind of gets to it. It's who, and I've had, when I had Global Entrepreneurs Talk Radio, I actually, one of the reasons I became I knew I needed to do something different, even though it was a great show. And I had a lot of famous people on there, but a lot of these people were promoting, products and services that they did not use to get to where they were.
Right.
They were not offering my listeners, some of them were not offering my listeners any value whatsoever.
So I found this exact thing, and the reason I started a previous podcast it's kind of more a passion project now, called the Burning Desire Show, was kind of similar. So I was sick and tired of listening to, like how I built this with Guy Raz and all these like big entrepreneurial podcasts where they get the founder of Panera Bread, or they get the CEO of PepsiCo, whomever on, and they're talking about their story, and like, it's so long since they thought about their story that I find that they're just backfilling with like utter nonsense. So like the guy from Panera Bread, and I'm sure he's a lovely guy and very successful, he's a billionaire for sure. He was asked why Panera Bread was so successful versus, at the time, I think PepsiCo and a bunch of other real big companies are trying to get into that kind of space, that bakery kind of space, casual dining space. And his literal view was so simple. He said, well, we had really passionate people and they had more MBAs. It's like, all right, that's just not like relatable. It's not it's not useful. It doesn't help people. And like, it's that relatability I found. A lot of these people where you're dead right. And I think you put it so well. They haven't used the methods in which they are training other people in. And I think there's a real good YouTube video with Grant Cardone on Jordan Belfort, who is the guy from Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
And Jordan Belfort's interviewing Grant Cardone, and like some of the things Grant Cardone says, like you wouldn't believe what he's like. Oh yeah, I charge like individuals X price, and I charge corporates 100 times X just because they're corporates. And like he's like, I hate selling things, but like, and Jordan Belfort's like, but like your whole thing is that you're a great salesperson, like, but you hate selling. Like this makes no sense. And like it's worth watching because it kind of it really.
I've seen part of it.
Skin.
I've seen part of it, yeah.
It gets in the skin. I guess the guy, again, it's just a personal thing. The guy that I find interesting, and I saw something again of him the other day on Mike Tyson's Hot Boxing podcast, is Tony Robbins. I think he has something really interesting that's not just, oh, I'm here to sell. Of course he's here to sell stuff, but I don't believe, I'm quite good at sensing sincerity. And like a lot of these guys, I just look and I'm like, it's just insincere. It's like, it's just, as you say, can I get more of eyeballs on what I'm doing and therefore more sponsorship, etc. It's not how can I actually change lives. Whereas I feel with Tony Robbins, given his career has spanned so many years, one, two, with the people he's worked with, there's something about him that I think is far more sincere and maybe closer to what you do than some of the more, let's call them socially famous people.
100%. Here's something I don't, maybe I'm not sure if we're going to edit this out or not. But let's while we're on people, let's go ahead and just talk about Gary for a second. Gary
Vaynerchuk
became successful doing what? He became successful because he was one of the first people to authentically be himself on YouTube at his I think his parents'
wine store or something.
Wine. That's how he became successful, just being himself and doing a YouTube thing, because he was one of the first people to do it. Right? It's real simple. That's all this other stuff. I mean, anyway, it's just it's people forget. Like I had one of my guests, I'm not going to say her name because I do admire her.
Sure.
On my on my Global Entrepreneurs Talk Radio, who she was just an insane hustler, busted her ass to become, a mega superstar. I'm not even going to say the genre she's in because it's, but on my show, she was hawking the whole work-life balance thing, right? And her life was anything but balanced to become a multi-millionaire mega superstar. Anything but balanced. I mean, it was like 90% work, 10% personal life and family and kids.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, it's so easy, so just authenticity and sincerity and transparency, man. I think they go a long way with just being honest about what you've been through, what you're going through, and how you got to where you are.
That's a really good point. And I think it's quite a nice way to lead this. The only thing I wanted to kind of for yourself is on that kind of point, what's the future for you in terms of your consciousness coaching? Where can people find you? Where can they engage with you? And yeah, you talked about this new book trilogy. Care to allude what that is or what that's going to be about?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I appreciate that. Who knows what the future holds. Right? So I do kind of refer to myself now as a performance coach rather than a consciousness coach. Consciousness is a huge part of it. But now I'm calling myself a performance coach because I think, it's taken this last couple of years have helped me to realize that that's what I do. And so, and it might sound arrogant, but I do what Wendy Rhodes does on that show, Billions. And it's kind of exciting because she's her character and I should say the writers, right, and the directors have blown that profession up. So this is kind of a kick-ass time for people like me that have been doing that. Now we're getting a huge spotlight on what that can potentially do, because those are real, even though those are fictitious everything's fictitious on the show, there are good examples of what's possible. You know, I don't necessarily go about it the same way she does, but the end result is the same, right?
Right.
So, you know, so for me, this time period is about challenging myself to think bigger than I've ever thought before, to become bigger than the problem. That's my challenge to my clients too right now. Become bigger than the problem. For some of them, that means withdrawing into meditation, and we're going through different exercises. For others, it means getting creative, brainstorming for an hour and challenging them that they're thinking smaller. A friend of mine went with Joe Polish and Dan Sullivan. You know, have you ever heard of the I Love Marketing podcast?
I haven't, no.
No, it's pretty decent. They're pretty good dudes. They went to Richard Branson's mastermind on Necker Island, and you know, where guys like Peter Diamandis was there, Ariana Huffington was there, right? And Joe Polish came away and said, you know, and my friend came away and said, you know, his mind was basically blown open, because it just this realization of how small we think. We can always think bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So that's the challenge right now, is how to think bigger. As far as my trilogy is, and people can find me on ChristopherPinckley.com, my website, and that's pretty much everything. My books are on Amazon.com under my name, Christopher Pinckley. The trilogy coming out is kind of top secret. You know, I haven't really told anybody yet. It's sort of based on integral psychology, sort of based on performance, and it's going to address kind of spiritual success, relationship success is book 2. These aren't the titles, but the first one is like achieving spiritual success. The second one is achieving relationship success, and the third one is achieving leadership. And so I'm not even sure now, you know, when they're going to come out. I'm talking with an agent, and you know, whatever that means. But you know, if I do decide to launch, you know, I'd be honored to come on your show and talk about it, of course.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. We'll definitely scheduled for that. Listen, it's been really, really interesting, and kind of I make this podcast, of course, to help other people, but it helps me massively. I talk to people from a range of different kind of professions and sectors of the health, well-being, fitness community. And it's such a joy to kind of hear other people's stories and give them opportunity to kind of tell their story, hopefully in a very kind of candid and like honest, authentic way. So thank you very much for being open and honest with us.
Yeah, I would like to close with, you know what, if it's not actionable, it's worthless, man. You know what I mean? Like, I like to try to make everything actionable. If I'm not giving people actionable takeaways, then I'm wasting their time.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
You know what I mean?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Good stuff.
I'll just stop the record.